Hello, Marisa, and welcome back to the Cut Off podcast. In episode 1 and 2, we learned about the profound personal anguish of parental alienation. And Marisa, you described it as a living grief and the type of terror that distorts the most fundamental parent-child bond. We also established that it is a form of child and domestic abuse. And we examined the psychological patterns like splitting and loyalty conflicts. From personal experience, Marisa also exposed the systematic blind spots in legal and clinical settings that often unintentionally enable further harm. And today, we'll delve into what concrete actions can be taken, both personally and systematically, to move beyond the devastation and towards a future of hope and resolution. Marisa, after a parent recognizes they are experiencing parental alienation, a recognition you described as both validating but also terrifying, what is the very first practical steps you recommend to take?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm eager to start this episode because education information is only powerful if you know how to implement it, right? And that's really where the solutions start occurring is when we use the knowledge to change our current situation and hopefully improve the future for our children. So to answer your question directly, I've always thought the most significant thing you can do is recognize it in early action. So it's one of the core principles I outlined in Shattered Bonds, Resilient Heart, my book. What happens is when you sense the bond with your child is being disrupted or eroded, you can't afford to dismiss it as just a phase. Parental alienation is like many complex conditions or diagnoses. It has a way of compounding and getting much worse the longer it goes unchecked. So early action doesn't mean panicking or overreacting. It really just means acting calmly and strategically, documenting changes, seeking credible support, and learning the signs so you can respond with clarity rather than fear. It's about shifting from feeling powerless to taking intentional steps that protect not only your relationship with your child, but also your own mental and emotional stability. And that's something that really is crucial and to recognize and be strategic in the way you handle things. Is recognize it, don't be in denial, and you really have to formulate a game plan, which sounds terrible because we're dealing with the potential loss of your children. It's crucial to understand that's exactly what the other side is doing. They're purposely deciding to behave in such a way their end goal is to cost you your relationship with your children. So it's a form of psychological warfare in a way. You always have to, unfortunately, view it as that way. And unfortunately, when you conduct yourself, try to plan your actions and your behavior in advance to prevent future harm. The paradox lies where recognition, it can bring validation, but it also brings just terror and grief and panic. And yet that recognition, it can become your turning point. If you act quickly and you act wisely, the sooner you step into that awareness and beginning putting prospective measures in place, the more opportunity you're going to have to preserve the connection you have with your children that already exists. So the foundation, every other step is built upon that I outlined in my book is really just the recognition and early action.
And many parents feel immense powerlessness. What do you think? How can they regain a sense of agency in these initial stages?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that regard. One of the most paralyzing aspects of parental alienation is that sense of powerlessness. As a parent, generally speaking, you're the one in control of your children, or you're supposed to. You're responsible for their well-being and their safety. And all of a sudden, the dynamic between you and your children is being completely altered, where your position in their life as the parent, the moral authority, all those things is being stripped away from you, and deliberately. So you're watching a bond that you've nurtured be undermined, often in ways that make you feel invisible to everyone but you. So the first step is regaining agency. It's to accept the painful reality that it's not a misunderstanding and it's not going to resolve because the other parent suddenly feels a sense of guilt or remorse. And it's not a situation where morality will eventually balance the scales. And I will say that's an area where I still to this day falter, where I keep thinking at some point they and he have to wake up and feel exceptionally remorseful for what has occurred and what they're always trying to do. But we can't project your sense of morality and how you would handle things onto people who don't share the same. That's something that I find even challenging when I talk to other people and try to explain the situation. And they innocently don't really understand the gravity of it, and they can't comprehend how someone could do that. But that's coming from a point of being healthy and caring and having compassion and having a high moral standing. And people, unfortunately, who afflict parental alienation, they're void of those things. Denial of the fact, it only creates more space for the alienating party to escalate their behavior. So it's why I frame it as a form of psychological warfare. But warfare, it can mean strategy too. And your strategy begins with 3 pillars of early action. It's documentation, support, and self-regulation. So it's necessary to document patterns. It gives you clarity when the gaslighting sets in, and when you start second-guessing your own sanity, whether or not this is really occurring. And it builds a circle for yourself of informed support. It prevents isolation. And in addition to that, self-regulation, it allows you to remain the steady, consistent parent that your child can trust even in the midst of the hostility. What you don't want to do is be too emotional, too angry, too upset, because that just unfortunately feeds the narrative that's being repeatedly given to your child that you're unfit. Agency, it doesn't come from controlling the alienator. It comes from controlling yourself and your responses. And that's something that's really challenging, I think, for parents who are going through this. We try to plead, we're angry, we're irate, hoping that they'll change their behavior. But the unfortunate reality is it's very highly unlikely that they will, unless they are absolutely forced to because of legality reasons. So the moment you shift from reacting in despair to acting with intention, you start to reclaim your power. And that shift often is what sustains parents through that long, difficult road ahead.
Given the knowledge deficit, in healthcare and among professionals you've identified, how can targeted parents identify and access truly informed and effective therapeutic and legal support? What kind of specific qualities or expertise should they look for?
So one of the most disheartening realities parents face is that many professionals, whether it's healthcare, it's therapy, or the legal system, they're not adequately trained to recognize or address parental alienation. It's simply the case. And I've encountered this time and time again. That huge knowledge gap, it can leave parents feeling dismissed and even re-traumatized when they try to reach out for help. So how do you identify the right support, right? That is the question. The first step is always to ask direct, clarifying questions. When you're choosing an attorney, a therapist, a coach, or even a physician, any type of a healthcare provider, ask them how familiar they are with cases of parental alienation, and ask them if they can share how they've supported clients or their patients in the past in similar situations. So their answers would tell you quickly whether or not they understand the complexity of what you're facing. If they don't give you direct answer, and some have even asked me in the past, what is it? And it's simply they're coming from a place where they don't understand, they don't know, and they want to understand your perspective. But if you encounter that, of course, it would behoove you to try to find a professional that's more familiar with it, because they do exist. And at the minimum, make sure that they're aware of things such as reunification therapy. So even if they don't necessarily use the coined term parental alienation, make sure they can talk in regards to the circumstances that you're experiencing. Also, too, you're going to get a sense whether or not they believe you. So when you share your story, you discuss the details of your case and what's really upsetting you. And if they're skeptical, or if they ask questions out of inquiry, just so they can better help you, versus asking questions whether or not they're trying to gauge whether or not you're being truthful, I think it's important to note that, first impressions are everything. And the sad reality with parental alienation is a lot of targeted parents, we present, unfortunately, when we're so emotional, we're going through this terrible circumstance in our lives, we present not always like we're the most reliable sources of information. Like we're upset, we're scattered, we're angry, we're irate, so many negative emotions. And unfortunately, when clinicians or, people in the court system or attorneys, when they're meeting you, that's what they sense. So that's why, back to the power of your presence, it's really important too. And it does take a lot of self-control to try to ground yourself when you meet these people for the first time. This way you can present your case in an eloquent and concise yet thorough fashion, so they really understand that you're someone who's genuine, who's looking for help, and who wants to work with them help you. there's a lot of different tools you can use to determine whether or not they are the right professionals for you to help you with your endeavors. But obvious things like, do they show genuine empathy? A professional who minimizes your pain will not be equipped to guide you. So if I've had people say to me, my lawyer told me to sit tight, or just to sit back and wait and see how this plays out. And that's really not the right response, because the longer you remain silent and the longer you wait for things to progress, it's likely to only get worse. You really need, as far as legal help, you need people who are going to be aggressive in defense of you. Another suggestion would be, do they offer solutions, or at least thoughtful suggestions? So even if they can't solve everything immediately, which is very unlikely, their willingness to strategize is a sign of an ally. I encourage parents to carve out time to clearly explain what they're experiencing. This just isn't for the professional's benefit, but it helps you gauge how they're listening, right? So whether they grasp the urgency and if they're prepared to walk alongside you throughout what can be a long and extremely complex journey. So when you combine asking the right questions with trusting your intuition about their empathy and responsiveness, you can greatly increase your chances of building a support system that actually empowers you, rather than just leaving you feeling more isolated.
In the same realm, let's talk about red flags. For example, what kind of red flags should parents be aware of when they're seeking help, in order to avoid professionals who might actually unintentionally end up enabling the alienation?
Yeah. Absolutely. And unfortunately, that happened in my case. The red flags often reveal themselves in the subtext. It's not what's being asked or being acknowledged, even though it can be that overt. Some professionals may seem warm, empathetic, and highly polished in the presentation, but if they can't really clearly articulate their experience with parental alienation, their support is likely to be superficial at best and harmful at worst. And they're just looking for new clients, regardless of the circumstance. One major caution that I experienced is with therapists who are trained, therapists in general, they're trained to validate the feelings without questioning their origins. So if your child shows up to a therapy meeting and they just spent, all of their time with the party that's alienating you from them, they're almost provided scripts and they're provided information. They're told repetitively how to think and feel. So when they show up to that therapy session and they're upset with their parent, it's really because, it's a consequence of parental alienation. So they are parroting, or they're reiterating what is being told for them to say. And the therapists, they only take that at face value. They'll listen to that, they'll believe the child, and they'll validate their feelings. So often parents then who go to corresponding therapy sessions, they're told that they're going to have to work even harder to gain their child's trust, and they're going to have to validate their feelings. And they're basically, the parents who are being alienated are being given a message by the therapist to be remorseful for things they've never done, never said, and who aren't they are. And the therapist, unfortunately, in time and time again, they don't believe the alienated parent. And it's a tragedy. It makes the parent feel more isolated, feel extremely angry, and they feel like the system has completely betrayed them. It happened in my scenario where I had hard evidence disputing things that were being said about me, allegations. And it was really hard for the professionals to really grasp, well, children can also lie too. Children can also be told to say things out of fear and be convinced that things aren't true. So when I presented evidence, they weren't sure exactly how to take that. It was very hard for them, like I said, to contemplate the flip side of the coin, my argument, or my concerns about my children's safety. So the same principle applies in the legal arena. Some attorneys are eager to take on cases without fully understanding the nuances of alienation, which means they may waste your precious time, your investment, your resources, pursuing strategies that actually strengthen the alienator's position. So it's crucial to remember that alienating parents are often highly skilled manipulators. Their tactics don't stop with the child. They extend to the professionals, to the courts, and anyone else who can be swayed. So I'll say a critical red flag is if you're a legal or mental health professional, they don't recognize that manipulation is central to the alienator's behavior, or they dismiss your concerns as if they're exaggerated. That's a sign that they may be inadvertently enabling the very abuse that you're fighting. So true effective professionals are those who do not demonstrate animosity, who demonstrate empathy towards you, who show discernment, question the context of what's presented, and they stay alert to how coercive control can really distort reality.
Thank you for that insight. I'm actually happy that we can be in the conversation stage where we talk about the therapeutics part as well, where, for example, when the child and alienated parent can get together again. So here is a next question that for children caught in resist and refuse dynamics, what are some therapeutic approaches that have shown promise in fostering reunification or reestablishing a healthy relationship with the targeted parent?
Yeah. So there's no one size fits all therapy for resist refuse dynamics. Each case you have to kind of tailor make the way you're going to handle it, the way you're going to treat it, and the way you're going to respond to the circumstances that are happening at the moment. Unfortunately, with alienation, things are very fluid. It's not one isolated abusive incident. It's just this ongoing cascade of events that tend to just build upon themselves. But the most effective approaches share three things. They educate children about manipulation. They rebuild trust through safe and structured connection. And they support parents in staying calm, consistent, and compassionate. So that steady presence is often the most powerful therapy of all. So what research and lived experience both show is that the most promising approaches share those three contexts. They educate, they rebuild trust, and they create a safe space for genuine connection. So sometimes it looks like reunification therapy programs where a therapist helps the child and parents slowly reconnect through structured activities, while also teaching about loyalty binds and manipulation. Then other times it can be a multimodal approach where one professional works with the child, another supports the parent, and sometimes the court oversees compliance so progress isn't lost. Unfortunately, with many of these cases, the alienating parent, they'll postpone the meetings, they won't show up, they'll give a million reasons why the child should not and won't go. In my situation, my ex is trying to get sole custody, so I have no access to my older children, and really with no grounds except false allegations. But unfortunately, my circumstances is common in severe cases of parental alienation, so they'll do anything they can to prevent reunification.
Yeah, you were saying in the last episode how you couldn't even go to evaluation with your child for them to evaluate how is the relationship because they didn't show up.
Yeah, they'll do anything to obstruct it.
You've described how children might parrot phrases or exhibit the rehearsed language. So how do effective interventions, for example, help a child disentangle from these manipulated narratives?
Yeah, and just to revisit exactly what parroting is. Parroting is when children repeat phrases that sound rehearsed and they parrot the alienated parent's words. It's often a sign that their authentic voice is being overshadowed by fear, loyalty binds, or manipulation, all subject to coercive control. Effective interventions, they don't attack the child for using that language. Instead, they create space for the child to slowly rediscover their own thoughts and feelings. So one way this happens is through gentle questioning and psychoeducation. A skilled therapist, they might invite the child to reflect on where a belief comes from. They're going to delve deeper into why this child is saying things and really inquire the meaning behind the words that they've been told to say or taught to say, and whether or not it matches their lived experience. So this helps them begin to separate what they've been told to believe from what actually they feel and what actually they remember. Another approach could be experiential connection with a targeted parent. So you could participate in activities with them that feel safe, enjoyable, and that are free from pressure. So over time, those lived moments, they contradict the negative narrative, and the child can start to see, wait, my parent, they can start to hopefully feel that their parent, what they're being told about their parent and who the parent is today, it doesn't match the story that they've been given whatsoever. So most importantly, effective interventions, they avoid confrontation. So it's really important. It's crucial when your child is experiencing severe or even moderate parental alienation is you don't want to participate in behaviors like pleading with them, trying to convince them of the misnomers, of the misunderstandings, and the false allegations. You want to try to capture the life you once had with them and the enjoyment you had. And so it can help them recall who you were as a parent in the best of times. And that's really what you want to do and really capitalize on when you're with your children.
And let's talk about your methodology, Marisa. You have developed a methodology based on your own experience and expertise of what you have lived through. So what kind of guidance, for example, could one expect if they came for help to you?
So my coaching methodology, it was born out of both lived experience and years of studying it now, studying how trauma, coercive control, and family systems can affect parents and children. So when someone comes to me for guidance, the first thing they can expect is always a safe, judgment-free space. Too often, alienated parents have been silenced, dismissed, and we're told we're overreacting. I start first by validating their experience and helping them put language to what's happening, because clarity is the foundation of healing. And the truth is, if they can't feel safe in my presence and feel like they're being understood and heard, then it doesn't matter what I say or what to provide them. It's not going to resonate. It's going to be hard for them to digest it and then implement it if they first don't feel like what they're saying and sharing is resonating with me and that I don't believe them. And unfortunately, a lot of these parents, they're very jaded, they're very guarded because they've been through the ringer. Had so many people not believe them or question their judgment, their sanity, their ethics, their parenting skills. So often they're very guarded, and rightfully so. And sometimes they can almost be a little hostile. And I have to excuse that, because the truth is I was once all those things. So I use a structured framework. I call it the 7 steps for sanity, serenity, and success, which I also expand in my book, Shattered Bonds, Resilient Heart. These steps, they're not based upon chronological steps. You can jump back and forth between them. It's not regimented. You don't have to go, it's not like a 7-step process where you have to start at 1 and you have to end at 7. But they consist of early action, documentation, boundary setting, self-regulation, building support systems, and a lot more. It's both practical, it's emotional guidance, because you can't separate the legal and relational battles from the toll that it's taking on your well-being. So I'll say, truthfully, depending on the client's needs, the guidance might look like learning how to document effectively without getting consumed by it if they're in and out of court. It could be practicing self-regulation techniques so they remain calm in front of their children. And that's something that's always applicable to any person, to any parent experiencing this, because it's really, really easy, regardless of who you are, to become overwrought with your emotions and kind of not lose control of yourself is the wrong terminology, but not measure exactly what you're saying and how you're acting, just because the injustice of everything. Something else I focus on is strategizing on how to communicate with legal counsel and therapists in ways that highlight alienation without sounding defensive. Because when you start sounding too defensive, then you start becoming angry, and then you start being painted as this unstable, reactionary, vicious person. The truth is you're just defending what you know to be right. And it's very hard at times not to have the anger cloud your judgment and cloud the way you're presenting yourself in front of people who are constantly more or less summing you up, trying to determine whether or not what you're saying is truthful. And, also too, it's important to note that simply rediscovering hope, your identity, and resilience when parents feel like all those things in their lives have been defined by loss, trying to find places in your life and moments in your life where you're not completely focused and you're allowing this to consume you every moment. And I think even though when parents come to me and they're requesting support, I always want to acknowledge what their challenges, their struggles, acknowledge their most pressing concerns, whether they're legal, emotional, or all the above. But also too, at the same time, it's important for me to always reinforce to people that they still need to find time in their lives to continue with the activities, with the things that they once loved to do, their hobbies, what makes them happy. So that's something that often is understated, but is a necessity, I think, for people to stay grounded while they're battling this.
Yeah, Marisa, I did check out your book, The Shattered Bonds, Resilient Hearts. And I was just curious, how did your book come to be? You shared the compassionate trauma-informed roadmap to recovery with the 7 steps, but like any book author, it would be interesting to know what you were feeling, or how did you come about to, okay, I'm going to put this in a book.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So the book, it really came from a place of necessity for me. I realized early on that I couldn't just rest on the moral high ground and hope the truth would eventually speak for itself. Not when my ex-husband and his family were actively making false allegations. So the more I researched parental alienation, the clearer it became how widespread it is, and yet how invisible it remains in our culture. So our courts and even our health care system, it's still going unchecked largely. So along the way, I made a lot of mistakes that felt inevitable in the moment, but with more guidance could have been prevented. And I've always hated needless pain, especially when it comes from missed opportunities to learn. So writing Shattered Bonds, Resilient Heart, it became my way of transforming that pain into something useful, something others could lean on when they felt just as lost as I once did. It's also, of course, it's deeply personal. So for a long time, I carried shame and fear of being misunderstood. Putting the truth on paper was liberating for me in a lot of ways. It gave me a voice when silence felt safer. More than anything, it serves 2 purposes. It's a guide for parents devastated by this form of abuse, obviously, but it's sort of my selfish endeavor, where it's my own release from the shame that it's haunted me for so long now, for 2 years. Because the truth is, at the end of the day, what matters most, it's not how others distort you. It's the truth that you hold for yourself.
Beautifully said. And Marisa, you've also spoke powerfully about parental alienation as a living grief, that feeling. And I'm curious what self-care strategies or emotional frameworks have been most helpful for you in these difficult times, or what you've seen, that work for others in coping with this unique, profound form of loss.
Yeah. I'm going to preface this by saying that there's not really a single self-care strategy that works for everyone across the board, because everyone's circumstances are unique to themselves. But what matters most is believing that healing is possible and choosing a framework you actually resonate with. Even the best tools, they are not going to work if your mind is convinced they won't help. So the first act of self-care is permission, giving yourself permission to believe that you deserve the support, even if your circumstances haven't changed yet, even if you made some mistakes along the way, even if you acted out in anger, even if you became emotional and you lost your cool, you still deserve the support. Dealing with this, you absolutely do. For me, coping with parental alienation, it meant building a practical system and an emotional framework. Because on the practical side, I focused on 2 things primarily. The first one, it's called containment. So it consists of reducing constant emotional re-injury by creating boundaries around what I consumed or who I spoke to, what conversations I allowed myself to engage in. So when I knew I was in the presence of someone that might not understand my circumstance, or be incredulous, or really didn't have the bandwidth to talk about it or support it, there's no point in me beating a drum. It's about, for me, containing my circumstances and refocusing on other things. Because the truth is, in reality, you could be experiencing something terrible. And I think too often we as parents, we're on a mission to have as many people believe us and see the atrocities that are occurring. And the truth of the matter is it's just not realistic. There are going to be people, regardless of what evidence you have and who you are, that are not necessarily going to be supportive of you. So containment is very crucial for your own emotional well-being. The second one, of course, I've touched on before, is regulation. Learning calming practices I could deploy anywhere. So whether it's breath work in the courtroom parking lot, grounding techniques after receiving an inflammatory email, or simply walking until the panic softened. Those are some of the real life scenarios that I've had to deal with. But emotionally, I had to adopt a new philosophy for survival. I call it living grief. Unlike a traditional loss, where there's closure, parental alienation is grief with moving parts that are constantly changing. So I begin anchoring myself in principles instead of outcomes. So I show up in alignment with my integrity, regardless of how I might be portrayed. I protect my peace because my child will need a whole parent that they can return to at the end of the day. And I'll allow joy to exist alongside pain, to wait until this is over to start living again. And that's something that really was a challenge for me on a personal level when I was going through this acutely. It was really hard for me to move on with my life and seek new people in my life, look for new connections, because I felt selfish in a way. I felt selfish that I should almost be so distraught and upset that I shouldn't be looking for opportunities for happiness. I should be basically placing all of my efforts, all of my focus, all of my energy on amending the circumstance. And when you can't always fix everything within the time frame you want to, then sometimes you rob yourself of living during that time frame too. So, and unfortunately, you'll hear and you'll have people judge you, and they'll think, well, if you're going through this and you're so upset, then why are you out with a friend, or why are you participating in this activity, or why are you doing this? And that's really from a place of ignorance, because they don't realize parental alienation, unfortunately, hopefully not, but in some circumstances, this is something that's ongoing that can take months and years to rectify. So that doesn't mean that you should put your life on hold for the extent of that time.
Yeah, you have to be still a mother or a father to that adult child later, right? Yeah. And what do you think? How can parents combat the feeling of questioning their own sanity or being gaslit by people or systems as they navigate this trauma?
Excellent question. One of the coreless aspects of parental alienation is the way it erodes your sense of reality. So when you're constantly misrepresented, disbelieved, or told you're overreacting, it's normal to question your own sanity. This isn't a personal weakness. It's the predictable effect of long-term gaslighting. So the first way to combat this is through anchoring yourself in evidence. Document what's happening in clear, unemotional language, dates, times, and behaviors. Seeing the facts in black and white, it helps you separate what's real from what's really being distorted. And it's a good reference point, too, for yourself, because as things evolve, and hopefully they don't worsen, but if they do, and you have professionals questioning you, you can go back. And the reality is you can't always remember all the details of what occurred that day and that moment. But if you can document them, then it builds the case, and it also helps you understand, and it provides you an opportunity as you review history, unfortunately, to give yourself a sense of compassion and understanding of how much you've been through. So the first way to combat that is through anchoring yourself in evidence, as I said. The second is building a circle of informed support. So isolation, it's the alienator's greatest ally. Even one trusted person who understands parental alienation, whether it's a coach, a therapist, or another targeted parent, can act as a reality check when systems make you feel invisible. And that was really crucial for me. I found parents that have experienced it and listened to their stories, and, holidays or birthdays, whatever it is, whatever thing that might unfortunately trigger negative emotions, we have a support group where at least they know that they can pick up the phone and call someone and talk to them if their own family isn't necessarily supportive or understanding. And some people, unfortunately, they don't have support groups. It's a necessity for your own emotional well-being. Third, it would be practice self-regulation and self-trust. Gaslighting, it thrives on emotional chaos. So the more you can calm your nerves, your nervous system, through grounding, through breath work, whether prayer helps you, movement, journaling, it really doesn't matter, as long as you're not adopting unhealthy behaviors such as substance abuse or things of that nature. Whatever works for you is what really matters. The harder it becomes for false narratives, when you find something that's working for you, it's much harder for false narratives to take root. So over time, your body starts to recognize I may be under attack, but I'm not crazy. Once again, if you find something that works for you in calming yourself, grounding you, and recentering your focus, keep practicing that. Don't give up. Finally, remember your stability is your power. So you don't have to convince everyone. You only need to stay aligned with the truth. So when opportunities for justice arise, whether in court or with your child, you're ready and you're steady. And that's how you reclaim your sanity and your agency, even in the middle of a systemic gaslighting.
Thanks for that. I remember, Marisa, in episode 1, you shared your hesitation to speak out publicly due to fear of being seen as playing victim or airing dirty laundry. What advice would you offer to alienated parents who are struggling to reclaim their narrative and voice, both personally and within their communities?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And that's something that really stymied my growth emotionally and affected my legal case, unfortunately, is because I remained silent, just hoping that morality would take hold, but it didn't. So for a long time, I hesitated to speak publicly because I didn't want to be seen as this bitter, dramatic person playing the victim. Unfortunately, as an emergency room nurse, I am exposed, and everyone in healthcare, we're exposed to people who proliferate second gain or they enjoy attention. And that was my biggest fear, is that's how this would be perceived, is that I would be doing this as like trauma sharing, or just as if I was someone who would appreciate playing the victim. And it's really not the case. It took me a long time to get to this point. And the reality is, parental alienation, it's the most misunderstood form of abuse, so much that even telling the truth can make you look unstable or vindictive. So that fear, it kept me silent for longer than I ever should have been. What finally shifted everything for me was realizing that silence, it wasn't protecting my dignity. It was protecting the false narratives being used against me, and it was being used as another weapon. My advice to other alienated parents is this: you don't have to shout your story from a rooftop, but you do have to reclaim it for yourself. You need to start privately, if you can, journal, record voice notes, speak it out loud in your car. You have to hear your own truth again before you can expect anyone else to. So give yourself grace in doing that. And then when you're ready to share it publicly, whether it's with a friend, a pastor, a therapist, a coach, or eventually a wider audience, perhaps, speak from your integrity, not from your wound. You're not airing your dirty laundry. You're refusing to let someone else define your character or rewrite your relationship with your child. And that's the point of this. Here's something I learned really the hard way, is you don't need universal approval to speak. Only alignment with your values is what's really most important. If you're rooted in your honesty, clarity, and love rather than revenge, people will feel the difference. So there's always going to be those who misunderstand you, but the right people, they're going to hear you. They're going to be drawn to your courage. And those are the people that you're really speaking for.
And how can parents build a supportive network when many around them may not understand, as you experienced with mixed emotions from friends and family?
One of the most painful parts of parental alienation is realizing that the people you assumed would be your support system, whether it's friends, family, even professionals, they don't always understand. Some get very uncomfortable with the topic, and some stay neutral out of fear. It is an uncomfortable topic. And some, they even might buy into the false narrative. And that's the reality of the situation. You're going to face opposition when you're experiencing this. And it can feel like a second betrayal on top of the first. But what I've learned is you don't need everyone. You only need the right ones. So sometimes those people are not the ones you'd expect. So I guess the question might be, how do you build real support when your existing circle might feel unreliable? I think one of the crucial answers is to separate your emotional safety from familiarity. And that is very challenging when you're going through something such as this, because just because someone's known you for an extended period of time, whether it's years or months, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're equipped to support you. So I had to learn the hard way, is stop trying to convince people who aren't capable of understanding. It's important to protect your energy. And those people who aren't capable of understanding what you're going through or really believing all the facets of what you're experiencing, I mean, in a way, they're lucky, because they've probably come from a healthy, functional, supportive background where it's really hard for them to envision something such as this. So don't get angry with those people, but also control your emotions, but also conserve your energy. Don't spend too much time with those people at the same time trying to convince them of something that they might not have the capacity to understand. So with that being said, seek out people who speak the same language as you do on alienation, whether it's support groups, online communities, coaches, therapists, or even other targeted parents. You don't always need people who require a 30-minute explanation before compassion. Being able to share without defending yourself is healing in itself. So just sometimes for me, simply saying, yeah, unfortunately, my relationship with my older children It's not what I want. But when people say, when are you going to see your kids next? I might say, I'd love to see them today, but right now, there's a lengthy legal court case, and I'll say my time with my children is limited, but not because of any reason of my own or because of legality, because my ex and his family have made it that way, in a way where it's very challenging to see my children, and it's something I struggle with. And I'll leave it at that. And that opens the door for more questions, but also, too, it doesn't overwhelm people with too much information. And often I'm surprised where people then will sort of delve into their own shared and lived experiences, and they'll say, I had a family member or a friend or someone who also experienced the same thing. Just recently, I met a mother at a playground. She came up and introduced herself, and we talked a little bit. And she shared with me that when her parents got divorced, her father kept her from her mother when she was 6 through 10 for 4 years. She wasn't able to see her mother. So it's something that's so much more widespread than people realize. And she just wasn't sure how to talk about it. But it's something that still is a divisive factor in her family today that has affected now, conversely, her relationship with the alienating party, where she doesn't have any respect for them. So there's so much to be said about this, and I could drone on about it for a long time, but that's just because the nature of the topic and how complex it can be. And everyone's circumstance is unique to themselves. So I think it's incumbent upon me and other people who want to dedicate their resources and their support to helping others such as us, to really look at as many possibilities, many avenues out there that could help other parents.
From a registered nurse's perspective, can you suggest any specific tools or perspectives from your healthcare experience that would help stay resilient and maintain some kind of mental well-being?
Yeah, sure. So absolutely. My background as a registered nurse, it shaped the way I approach trauma and endurance, not just physically, but emotionally too. So in healthcare, especially in high pressure environments, you learn quickly that resilience isn't about being unaffected. It's about recovering faster and staying functional even when your heart is breaking. So there's a few tools and perspectives from healthcare that translate powerfully to parents going through alienation. And one, this is in direct relationship to what I've done as a profession for so many years, and I call it triaging your stress. Not everything is an emergency. So in nursing, you assess what's urgent versus what's not, and what's just being said out loud. So alienated parents are often under relentless emotional assault, emails, court filings, accusations. Not every fire needs to be fought immediately. It's okay to ask yourself, is this actually life-threatening, or is it just emotionally triggering at the time? Treat what's critical and compartmentalize the rest until you have the capacity to respond. So there have been times where I receive emails from my husband's counsel that I know are incendiary and outrageous and outlandish. And that moment, I don't want to necessarily open it. I'm in the middle of something more important. So I decide to open it when it's right for me emotionally. As long as I'm not missing an important court date, I don't have to respond every single time they launch an attack. It's a waste of my energy. I'm the person that's in control of my time and my energy. And I'm not going to let anyone else take control of that, as an example. So another approach I would say is stabilizing before you strategize. So just like in medicine, you don't operate on someone who's actively crashing. So parents need emotional stabilization before making major decisions. So that could mean breath work. It could mean stepping away. It could mean journaling or calling someone in your support system, not reacting in panic. This is sort of a play on words, but using vitals for your mental health. In healthcare, we track breathing, your pulse, your blood pressure, all your crucial vital signs. Emotionally, you could view it as tracking your own vitals, but those might be: am I sleeping? Am I eating well? Is my nervous system calm, or am I in fight and flight? Is my sympathetic nervous system taking control? When your mental vitals crash, so does your clarity. So you can't advocate for your child if your own body is in crisis. But I would say, there's some things I kind of wish I would have incorporated into my book, but adopting a healthcare mindset, like you can't pour from an empty cup or an empty IV bag, right? So nurses learn quickly that you can't save others when you're depleted. Parents often think self-care is selfish, and it's not. It's life support. So your child will one day need the version of you that survived with strength, not the version that was burned out from proving a point. And that's something that I'm very much guilty of. So I will say my nursing background, it's taught me that treating your mental health like a patient, you're responsible for keeping alive. Some days that's the most courageous act you'll perform is just caring for yourself, not necessarily being productive that day.
Your book also delivers a very powerful message of hope, stating that a relationship, though shattered, is not beyond repair, and that your courage can rewrite the ending. What kind of thought process or framework should alienated parents follow in order to sustain and keep that belief?
Yeah, that message, it's a relationship that can be shattered, but not destroyed ultimately. It's not just inspirational. It's a survival framework. Because when you're an alienated parent, hope has to be more than a feeling. It has to be discipline. So the mindset I recommend is that I call it hope with structure. It has 3 parts. You separate outcome from your identity, which is very hard to do. You might not be able to control when or where or how your child returns, but you can control the kind of parent you remain while you wait. Even if your child is rejecting you, you can still choose, I will be the safe parent. I will be consistent. I will be someone that they can return to when they're ready. You can also trade, when will this end? And this is something I ask myself. When will this ever end? Or how will I carry myself until it does? And if you focus on the timeline, you'll burn out. Instead, you could ask yourself, what values do I refuse to compromise? Even if in the middle of this storm, this keeps your dignity intact, and your child will feel that one day, even if they can't see it right now. And holding 2 truths at once, grief and possibility. You're allowed to continue to grieve. And the truth is, hopefully, that grief will end, but there's a chance it might not. So alienated parents, they have to not just compartmentalize, but they have to rethink, how can I say it? In reality, they have to realize that both of those things can exist, grief and possibility. You can grieve the loss, and then you can also simultaneously believe in restoration. So that duality, it's not weakness, it's emotional maturity. And conquering your emotions and your mindset, that tends to be the biggest challenge through all of this, is conquering yourself and how you're going to view the circumstance.
You've described parental alienation as having public health implications that can become a generational crisis. And building on that thought, what do you think are the most critical systemic changes in legal, clinical, or societal spheres that you believe are necessary to better protect children and targeted parents?
Yeah, well, when I describe parental alienation as a public health issue, I'm not being dramatic at all. I'm being accurate. We are watching a preventable form of emotional abuse ripple through families, courtrooms, clinical settings, and if we don't intervene systemically, it becomes a generational crisis. There are 3 areas where change is urgently needed: the legal, clinical, and then also societal. So as far as legality, recognition and accountability. Courts need to recognize parental alienation not as high conflict custody disputes, but as a form of coercive control and psychological abuse. And that means training judges, attorneys, and guardians ad litem to differentiate real estrangement from manufactured rejection. It means mandating early screening for alienating patterns and before years of damage can accumulate. And it also means holding false accusers accountable the same way we prosecute substantiated abusers. As far as the clinical realm, education and therapeutic reform. Mental health professionals, they must stop unintentionally worsening the alienation. Right now, many therapists validate the loudest voice in the room, which is often the alienating parent. What we need is standardized training for therapists around resist-refuse dynamics, loyalty binds, and manipulation tactics. We need treatment protocols that challenge distorted narratives rather than passively reinforcing them, and reunification models that prioritize child safety, not comfort-based neutrality. As far as society goes, the societal stigma reduction and cultural literacy, I mean, those are long, lengthy words, But really, it's spreading awareness to society and making them really understand. There's so many people in society who have experienced this or know someone who has, and they have emotional scars from it, but they don't know how to convey what they've experienced. They don't know that there's terminology for it. And when there is no terminology and there's no identification, then this just persists and it goes on and it just emboldens the abusers. What I'll say is culturally, we need to stop viewing alienate parents as bitter or obsessed and start seeing parental alienation for what it is. It's a breakdown in the child's right to love both parents without fear. And that shift happens through public awareness campaigns like we've seen for domestic violence and addiction, responsible media coverage that doesn't sensationalize but human, and inclusion of parental alienation in education and healthcare diagnostic frameworks. So ultimately, I think if we can reframe this issue the way that we did with domestic violence and mental health stigma, we will save not just parents, but generations of children who deserve the freedom to love without manipulation.
Specifically, what policy shifts in areas like mandatory training for family court judges or updated DSM criteria would make the biggest difference, you think?
Yeah, so right now, many judges interpret alienation as mutual conflict instead of identifying who is perpetuating coercive control. What we need is required education on resist-refuse dynamics, loyalty binds, and coercive parenting tactics. Early screening protocols is something else that's a necessity in custody evaluations, just like we do for domestic violence or substance abuse. We need a standardized framework for distinguishing alienation from justified estrangement. Inclusion of parental alienation, ultimately, or coercive control parenting in DSM or the ICD frameworks. So whether it becomes its own classification or it's formally acknowledged as a subtype of psychological abuse, official recognition, it would give therapists a diagnostic pathway instead of avoiding the issue. It would allow insurance coverage for unification or therapeutic interventions, and it would reduce the current problem where professionals fear taking sides and end up enabling abuse. Accountability measures for false allegations and noncompliance. We already have penalties for contempt of court. We just rarely apply them in custody cases. Policy reform should include clear consequences for proven malicious allegations used to sever parent-child relationships. Enforcement of court-ordered parenting time with real repercussions for interference. As far as public health integration, parental alienation should be treated like other adverse childhood experiences. And that could be, meaning pediatricians, school counselors, social workers are trained to recognize behavioral indicators. Prevention grants and public funding are allocated the same way they are for bullying and domestic violence education. So even if 2 of these policies were implemented, just 2, we'd see faster intervention, fewer destroyed families, and children growing up with truth instead of experiencing trauma.
For listeners who feel compelled to join the mission of raising awareness and pushing for change, what concrete actions can they take, perhaps even on a local level, to advocate for better recognition and an intervention of parental alienation?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. Because awareness, it's only the first step. So change happens when people take action, even in small ways. So you don't need a platform or a law degree to make a difference. There's a few things people can do, active listeners can do right now. They can start conversations gently but boldly. Parental alienation, as I have said, it thrives in silence and misunderstanding. So share articles, recommend documentaries. If you're a teacher, a therapist, a pastor, or a community leader, bring it up when family breakdown or mental health is discussed. What you're doing is you're planting seeds. Support the families you do see struggling. If you know a parent is being alienated, don't distance yourself because it's messy. A simple "I believe you" can be life-saving. Invite them to coffee. Offer practical help. Isolation is one of the most damaging parts of alienation, and you can interrupt that. Engage locally, too. It's another very feasible option, especially with schools, legislators, and support groups. Ask schools if they have training on family manipulation or psychological abuse dynamics. You'd be surprised how many people are aware of these circumstances, but there is no outreach for people. It's amazing how much education is put through the public school system and raising awareness for so many things, but not for this type of topic. So most don't, and simply asking signals that there is a great need for it. So you can contact your local representative and say parental alienation should be recognized as emotional abuse, what legislation exists to protect children in these cases. And lawmakers, they respond to repetition. It might not be the first email, it might not be the second, but after a few, sometimes it really hits home. So if support groups don't exist near you, start one. Even if there's 3 people in a library room or online, I would advise that. Don't just watch, document. If you're a friend, a grandparent, a neighbor, and you witness alienation tactics, write it down. Affidavits and witness accounts, they can be pivotal. Silence helps the abuser. Quiet documentation, it helps the truth. I guess the takeaway is you don't have to fix the whole system. And I think all the examples I gave can be a little overwhelming. But these are all possibilities that I've encountered during my own personal struggles. You just have to refuse to be another silent bystander. That's really ultimately the moral of this. Every voice that says this is real, that it's harmful, it brings us one step closer to cultural recognition. And cultural recognition is what forces policy change.
You emphasized also the power of naming it, putting a name to parental alienation. What do you think? How can individual voices collectively contribute to this broader recognition?
So naming it's powerful because silence is what allows abuse to look like conflict, and manipulation to look like choice. When one person names it, they may be dismissed. But when thousands of people use the same language, parental alienation, coercive control, psychological abuse, it forces society to stop treating it like a private family dispute and start recognizing it as a patterned harm. So individual voices, they become powerful when they are consistent and aligned. That doesn't mean everyone has to tell their full story publicly. Not everyone can or should they, but collectively we can. So use accurate language when we talk about it, not just drama, not just custody issues, but alienation, coercion, emotional abuse of a child. Speak up in everyday moments when someone makes assumptions about an absent parent or when a friend says kids always prefer one parent. That's a chance to gently introduce the truth. So share resources, articles, definitions, because repetition, it builds recognition, and recognition, it builds legitimacy. So over time, language becomes legislation. That's how every major movement has gained traction in history. So domestic violence, it wasn't taken seriously until people stopped calling it marital trouble and started calling it abuse. Addiction wasn't treated as a mental health issue until people stopped calling it moral failure and started calling it a disease, which it is. So when you name parental alienation clearly, calmly, and repeatedly, you're not just telling your story, you're helping rewrite the cultural dictionary. And once a society has the right language, it can finally pursue the right solutions.
Marisa, looking to the future, what is your ultimate vision of a world where parental alienation is no longer this silent devastation? What does healing and justice truly look like in that context?
Well, my vision's simple, but it's radical compared to where we are today. I imagine a world where no child's forced to choose between loving one parent or the other, because society recognizes that kind of psychological splitting as abuse, not preference. So a world where courts intervene at the first sign of manipulation instead of waiting for years of damage, and where therapists are trained not just to validate what is said, but to discern why it's being said. Healing's my vision. It doesn't just mean a courtroom win, if only it did. It means children growing into adults who can look back and say, I was influenced, but I wasn't lost. It means parents no longer having to prove their sanity while being gaslit by systems that don't understand the abuse in front of them. It means families rebuilding relationships not through shame or force, but through truth, time, and safety. Justice to me is when alienation is treated with the same gravity as physical abuse. Because emotional abuse, it's a wound, even if you can't see it on an X-ray. And healing is when a targeted parent no longer has to function in survival mode to earn back something that was never supposed to be taken from them. So ultimately, the future I fight for is one where children are free to love both parents without fear, influence, or guilt, and where parents are allowed to show up fully as protectors, nurturers, and healers, not defendants. That's what justice looks like, and that's why I'll keep speaking until this is no longer silenced and no longer dismissed.
Marisa, thank you. And how would you sustain hope for this future, even amid, everything that's going on, all the challenges?
It's a loaded question, but I don't sustain hope by pretending things are easier than what they are. I sustain it by choosing why I keep fighting, even when the outcome's not guaranteed. Hope for me, it's a feeling. It's a discipline almost. Some days I don't wake up feeling hopeful at all. Some days the grief is loud or the injustice feels unbearable. But I remind myself, if I give up, I confirm the ending someone else tried to write for me. I let them win. And if I persist, I keep the door open for myself and for my child. And at the end of the day, if I don't ever gain back the relationship I completely had with my older children, then perhaps I can help other people gain theirs back or find the peace that they deserve in their circumstances. I've learned to build two types of hope, a long-term vision, the belief that reunification and systemic change are possible, even if they're slow to come, and then daily hope, the small rituals that anchor me when life feels heavy, whether it's writing, walking, music, service to others, even helping one other parent gives my pain purpose. So when my own faith, it wavers, I borrow someone else's, whether it's another survivor, a spiritual source, or the future version of my child who I know will one day see clearly what's occurred. So when you ask how I sustain hope, I treat it like oxygen. Sometimes I breathe it naturally. Sometimes I have to manufacture it deliberately, but I never stop reaching for it because hopelessness is the one thing I refuse to surrender to, and that's what they want.
Marisa, thank you for guiding us through this conversation from a deeply personal pain to the broader societal impact, and now to these actionable steps for intervention and healing. And thank you for your book and for the therapeutic strategies there. Your courage in speaking out is really a testament to the fact that while the journey is way beyond difficult, healing and justice are still possible. Join us next time, everybody, as we continue to shine light on Cut Off. Thank you, Marisa.